Actually, it's reached the point now where it actually goes opposite direction. Is everybody in the office interviews the person who's going to be an assistant or an accountant or controller or something else, and I interview them last. I'm the one who puts the final stamp of approval, but they've already been screened by 3 to 5 other people. In my internet business, there's 8 to 10 people do the screening, and they meet with the new candidate. Meets with all of them, and then they get together at the end of the day and they say, "What do you think about the new candidate?" And 100% have to say yes, or they won't hire them because they don't want somebody on the team that everybody doesn't like. So what I used to do, though, I would interview the person, then I'd take them to the next office and introduce them to one of my managers. I'd say, "Here, why don't you talk to Victor about the business and ask him any questions that you have that you may not have asked me," and so on. And Victor would sit there and chat, and he's very good, very perceptive. And then afterwards, he'd say, "Well, why don't you come here?" And then introduce you to Susan, and Susan will talk, and then introduce you to Damon, and talk to Damon. And the person would be kind of taken down the office, and they'd interview with each person. They'd chat, say, "How you doing? How's life?" I never forget, I was about to hire a controller, and I interviewed her, and she seemed to be excellent. She had all the right answers. She was well-dressed, well-turned out, and everything else. So I said, "Well, why don't you talk to Victor?" So she talked to Victor, and then she talked to Susan, then she talked to Aaron, then she talked to Eric and somebody else. And I said, "Well, what do you think? Pretty good, huh?" And they said, "Are you kidding? Are you kidding? This person is terrible." I said, "Terrible?" She seemed pretty good to me. "Do you know that first of all, she's an alcoholic, and she's dope addicted. She got fired from her last 2 jobs for embezzlement. She's living in her car. She's been divorced and married twice. Her last husband is in prison. I said, "Where did you get all this information?" I mean, this person was terrible, terrible. And they said, "Well, you just ask questions. How you doing?" "Oh, I'm doing pretty good. Just got back from visiting my second husband in prison, and I was able to stop by the liquor store for a bottle of whiskey for this afternoon, and it's really hard to get dope nowadays. The prices are so high on the street, and I sure hope I don't get I sure hope I don't get sent to prison for embezzlement from I mean, it was just unbelievable, the stuff that she was saying. So never, 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 never hire anybody by yourself ever again. Now, if somebody says, "Well, I'm only one-person business," well, you have friends. And many companies will do this. They'll say, "Would you talk to my friend who's also in business and just talk about the job?" And then have your friend give you the feedback. This is the bottleneck. This is the core. This is the key that's going to determine your success or failure. Never hire anybody alone ever again. You understand that? Never, never, never. I was at a conference, an international furniture conference, with all the top executives of the biggest furniture stores in America and Canada. And one of my clients stood up in the middle of this, and I was talking. He stood up, he said, "Brian," he said, "can I make a contribution?" It wasn't even on this subject. He said, "Ladies and gentlemen, we brought Brian in, and he told us about this law of 3. Brian, would you tell us about the law of 3? He said, "We use that in every part of our company nationwide." He said, "It's transformed our business in terms of hires." And so I said, "Oh." So I told them, and they all applauded. He said, "We never make a mistake." And this is one of the most respected furniture executives in the world. I mean, he runs very, very big companies. So, okay. How to hire is check resumes and references personally. Is if a person gives you a resume and says, "I worked at this company before," you say, here's a great question. You say, "Well, I'm going to call your previous boss and ask him about you, and just ask him if you would be appropriate for this job. Is there anything that your boss will tell me that you haven't told me yet?" And then they will tell you the truth, that the boss caught them stealing, or they were doing something else, or their boss caught them sleeping or on the job or something else. In other words, if you tell them they're going to call the references and ask them, is there anything that they might say that you haven't told me so far? Never hire anybody without checking references. Never, 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 never believe it. More than 50% of references are false. More than 50% of backgrounds, education, employment history are falsified. Person says, "I made this video movie for my company." You call up and you find out they were the cameraman, or they were the sound person. They didn't make the movie at all. They were just an employee. "I achieved these incredible sales goals. When I was working there, we went from 50 to 100 in sales." You call them up and you find out they were a delivery clerk. They weren't in sales at all. company did grow in sales, but it had nothing to do with them. So always double check, double check, double check. Number 9, hire slow and fire fast. I have hired people on Monday, and this was a mistake. I made the hiring decision. I talked to the person. I thought it was a good person to hire. I hired them on Monday. They started on Tuesday. By Tuesday afternoon, I realized I'd made a mistake, and I fired the person right there. Once you realize you've made a mistake, fire them fast. Hire slowly, and some people will con you, but if you realize you've made a mistake, fire fast. Now, here's 2 rules with regard to firing. I teach a whole program on this. Rule number 1, ask with regard to every person who works for you, knowing what you now know, would you hire this person back again today if they came in and applied for their job again today? If you would not hire them back again, fire them tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. Because the answer to that, if you said, no, I wouldn't, that means it's too late to save them. It's over. It's only a matter of how much money and pain you're willing to endure until you get rid of this person. If you would not hire them back again today, fire them immediately. Not tonight, not later on in the week. You go back into your office, you screw up your courage, and you walk in and you say, I don't think this is the right job for you. I think that you'd be happier doing something else, and we won't need your services anymore. Period. Non-negotiable. Not, well, we'll give you another chance, and we'll try it out, and we'll see what happens. And most people who are fired have been expecting you to fire them for a long time, and they wonder why you were so gutless about it, why you had no courage, why you couldn't just screw up, put me out of my misery. It's sort of like a wounded animal. The person's failing at their job. They're miserable at the job. You're miserable for having them. Everybody around them is miserable because they do a poor job. Your job is to put them out of their misery. Bang! And it's the kindest thing that you can do for a dying animal. Do you understand me? It's not, you think you're being kind and compassionate by keeping a person in a job for which they're not suited? Peter Drucker says, if the person does not have a long-term future with your business, terminate immediately. The cruelest thing an employer can do is keep a person in a job in which they have no long-term future. The cruelest thing you can do is keep them away from finding a job where they have a future. Are you with me so far? This is not an act of compassion. It's an act of cowardice, gutlessness. It's an act of low character. It's actually an act of incompetence to keep a wrong person in a job. I'm kind of being hard on you, but I'm trying to give you a little bit of a shake. You know what I mean? And I do this with executives from Fortune 500 companies. I beat them up. I say, is there anybody back in your office you wouldn't hire again? They all go, oh God. So here's the second principle I will give you is, when is the best time to fire someone? And the answer is the first time you think about it. The first time it crosses your mind, fire them then, because it will never get any better. It's a downhill slope from that moment onward. And that's why I have fired people, hired them on Monday and fired them on Tuesday. As I realized, OMG, oh my God, I made a mistake. And get rid of it. In other words, stop the bleeding. And finally, start them off right, start them off strong. That means when you hire a new person, don't give them time to kind of gently get into the task, meet the other people, sort of, go for lunch and coffee with the coworkers and so on. When they come to work, what you do is you give them a list of 10 things to do. And you've got to get started on this right away. I need half of this by lunchtime, so move. There's your desk. Start moving. You hire a salesperson. Good. I want you to make 10 calls by noon. And I want you to come back and give me a complete report on the 10 calls. Who you spoke to, what you said, what they said, and what the follow-up is. Okay? And they come back at noon like a dog that just caught chasing a car, and give them another big assignment. What they found was that if you start a person off and load them with work, what will happen is they'll still be working at a high level. That forms their idea of working in this company. In this company, we work hard from the very first minute. And when they hire people, they'll start people working hard. None of this gradually slipping into a warm bath and so on. I remember many years ago when I sold a real estate development to a big company, And as a result, I had to explain it to the president, the big boss, who died worth $800 million. I told you that. He had 200 companies. And as we were talking, he seemed to take a liking to me. And he said, I met him with him again. I went in to see the development people with this project, and he asked me to come in. And he said, what would you think about coming to work for me as my personal assistant? I need someone like you. And I thought, well, I'd be very interested in doing that. But I do need to think about it. I'm, not entirely sure. And he said, great, well, you think about it. Anyway, I was taking an MBA program at the local university, and I would speak to him maybe once a week, once every 2 weeks. I'd come in, and he'd say, hi, how are things going? I'd say, well, I'm almost finished. My last statistics exam is at 2:30 on Thursday. And then I'm done. I'm finished with all my courses. And he said, well, that's nice. By this time, of course, they had all my information because we were now in a partnership with his business for this $3 million shopping center. Anyway, so I finished my exam at 2:30, and I went home. I'd been working on this course for 2 years, and I was exhausted. I went home, and I was finished. And statistics is an awful, awful program. If you ever taken statistics, it's awful. It's so difficult. And I went home, and I'm sitting there in my apartment, and the phone rings. It's about 5 minutes to 3, and it's the big boss. He said, hello, Brian. He said, how did everything go? And I said, great. I mean, it's quite an honor. This is one of the foremost respected business financiers in Canadian financial history in the 20th century. I mean, this guy was calling me. I mean, wow. And I said, yeah, it went really well. He said, well, have you given any thought to for me as my assistant? And I said, yes, I've thought about it, and I'd like to do it. He said, that's wonderful. That's great. He said, good. He said, we'll have an office for you. And I said, well, this is Thursday afternoon. Yes, Thursday afternoon. He said, I said, so should I start on Monday? I'll come in Monday morning. He said, how about now? How long will it take you to get here? And the office is about 15 minutes away. It was now 3 o'clock. I said, I can be there at 3:30. He said, good. I'll be waiting for you. I arrived at 3, went and dressed. This is when you dress properly for work. I went and put on my suit and went into work and everything else. I was showing right in. Sat me down. He said, now, okay, let's start. Here's my list. Here's what I want you to do. I want you to do this and this, and I want you to do that and that, and this and this and that and that. And for the next year and a half when I worked for him, I was working 14 hours a day. I had big black patches under my eyes. I was on airplanes or driving or working or running or operating divisions. I mean, I worked so hard. I never got so much experience. I never made so much money. But from the very first day, he had me working like a fanatic, non-stop, all day long. And I look back and I think, well, it was the best damn thing that ever happened to me. Best damn thing that ever happened to me. So, we say here is what I want you to do is attract and keep great people. I want you to answer these questions. Determine your hourly rate by dividing your annual income by 2,000. How much do you earn per hour today? And the rule is hire people to do anything that can possibly be done at a lower hourly rate than you earn. Number 2 is what are the 3 activities that pay you your hourly rate or more? Yesterday we answered the question. They are your big 3. There's the 3 things that account for 90% of your value. You've got to be clear about this because every thing that you do that is not those big 3 is a waste of your time and a betrayal of your future. It's letting yourself and your company down because you're doing things that have low or no value. You've got to focus on the big 3. Number 3, in what 3 areas are you excellent at what you do? And ideally, they should be the 3 things that pay you the highest amount. And if they aren't, then set that as a goal. Number 4 is what 3 tasks or activities at work do you enjoy the most? Number 5, what 3 jobs, three jobs or activities should you hire someone else to do? And number 6, who are you going to hire, assign, delegate, or replace immediately so that you can concentrate on your top tasks? And finally, what 1 action are you going to take immediately as a result of your answers to these questions? How will you measure that result, and what is your expected date of completion? Please begin. So you prepare your questions in advance. You write them down. Number 4, presentation skills. Give yourself a grade of 1 to 10. I present my product or service clearly. so that my prospect quickly realizes that what I sell is the ideal product or service for him or her. That means your presentation is really persuasive. Even if people are a little hesitant or a little skeptical, when you've made your presentation, they're starting to grab your arm, they're starting to rip your hand off. They want your product so badly. If your presentation is not creating that desire on the part of your customer, you need to work on it. Now, here's the rule. 95% of product presentations can be improved. And the most successful companies are the ones who have designed presentations so by the time they get to that end of the presentation, you are jumping out of your chair. You want the product. I have done a good deal of work with companies in Mexico. I was in Cancun about 3 or 4 weeks ago, and I was there about 3 or 4 months ago doing a seminar for timeshare people. And they actually call it fractional share. They'll take a condominium apartment, and they'll sell 52 weeks. And so when you arrive in Cancun, there's all kinds of booths and people everywhere trying to sell you a week. And then you can use your week at a variety of different resort hotels in Mexico and otherwise. So it is a big billion-dollar business. So they had me come down and speak on sales. Now, a friend of mine was with me at the time, and he's a very successful, very wealthy businessman. And as we were talking to the timeshare people, he said, by the way, he said, I own 2 timeshares here in Cancun. He lives in Canada. That's a long, long way away. I said, how on earth did you, and he's very cheap, and he's very skeptical. He said, how on earth did you end up going through this sales presentation, which is a real slick hustle? I mean, it's some of the best in the world. He said, well, he said, I came down here, and he's a businessman. I wanted to just see the presentation. I wanted to see how they did it. And they invited me to a presentation. They invite everybody to a presentation. They offer to give you a free round of golf, or if you will come and sit in on a presentation. They'll even offer to give you 2 nights free and pay your airfare plus a round of golf if you just come and sit in the room while the person at the front of the room gives the presentation. Has anybody been through one of these before? They're the most remarkable damn things. Anyway, he went there and he's got his arms folded, not interested at all. And they started this presentation and his arms came unfolded and he began leaning forward and shaking his hand. He started asking questions and they said, what is your name? He said, Moeller. He said, Mr. Moeller, you look like a very sophisticated businessman. You know, my manager would like to talk to you personally. Would that be okay? He's just in the next room. And he said, well, okay. So they took him out of the room to visit with the manager, who was the senior sales guy. And they sat him down and they began to talk to him about the benefits and advantages of owning a fractional share, owning 1 week that he could come and use at different times of the year and so on. And he was still fighting. He's a good businessman. He doesn't buy anything. And if he does, he buys it used or he buys it cheap. And he's worth about $50 million. And so he says, no. He says, you know, I'd like you to speak to my boss. My boss would like to meet a person like you. So we went and took him to the next office, which was the bigger boss. And it was a bigger office. By the time he was finished, he had bought the timeshare. And he walked out and he could shake in his head. He paid $25,000, $30,000 for this 1 week, shaking his head. He could not believe how he had been sold. And he's telling me the story. And the next year he came back and they called him up and said, Mr. Moeller, we're so glad you're here to use your timeshare. We'd love to meet with you and buy you a cup of coffee. They took him in and they sat him down. They sold him another week for another $30,000. He said, you could not buy from these people. Their presentation was so smooth. And he was happy. He was happy. He said, I've got 2 weeks. I come down here. I play golf. I go on vacation. I bring my family. So the next one is answering objections. And then finally closing the sale. Give yourself a grade of 1 to 10. How good are you at asking the person to take action now? And then number 7, resales and referrals. I get a steady stream of repeat sales and referrals from my customers. So give yourself a grade on each of those 7. And here is our discovery. Your weakest key skill sets the height of your income in sales. Your weakest key skill. If you are 8 or 9 or 10 on 6 of those, the one where you are 2 or 3, that's how much you earn. You earn a 2 or 3 out of a 10 potential. What this means is that bringing up your skill level in your weakest area can do more to increase your sales than any other thing that you can learn. But you've got to identify your weakest key skill. Sometimes with our salespeople, we'll say, if you could wave a magic wand and be absolutely excellent at any one of these 7 key skills in sales overnight. You wake up tomorrow morning and you are fabulous in this skill area. Which one skill would help you the most to double your sales? And so you look over the 7, be honest, you look over the 7, well, if I was really good at presentations, and it's usually prospecting, presenting, or closing are usually the big 3. If I was really good at presentations, I'd be able to double my sales. And you'll find that that's your weakest perceived area. And if you bring up your skills in presentations, you double, triple, quadruple your income. I've had people 5 times their income by bringing up their skills in either prospecting, presenting, or closing. They could not believe the difference. Now they're able to use all their other skills at the highest level. So ask yourself, if you could be absolutely excellent in any one area of selling, which one area would help you or your company to increase their sales the fastest? And you have to know the answer to this, because that becomes your focal point. That becomes where you focus. That's the most important skill you develop. Now here's the most wonderful thing that happens, is as you begin to develop that one skill that will help you the most, all your other skills start to improve. As you begin to dedicate yourself to continuous and never-ending improvement in one area, you start to become better in every other area simultaneously. And I have worked with more than 2 million salespeople in 71 countries, and hundreds of thousands of them have gone from rags to riches, gone from the bottom of their sales force to the top of their sales force by using my methods and techniques, especially the method of working on bringing up their weakest skill. And that's something that anybody can do, because all sales skills are learnable. Never allow your income to be determined by a weak skill when it's a learnable skill. That's like saying go to the gift store in the hotel here and buy this little thing on the shelf, and it costs you, 2,000 Tanzanian what? Shillings. It's 2,000 shillings. Go and buy it and increase your sales by 5 times. In other words, it's a skill. Just go and learn the skill. And don't hesitate. Don't wait. Just start learning the skill immediately. And by the way, we have some programs and books and things out there that have some of my best sales ideas that will help you. And I'm not trying to sell them because I don't make anything from them, because I don't even know who produced them. But they are some of the best sales materials in the world. Now, what is the most important part of this 2-day seminar? No, it's what you do afterwards. It's what you do afterwards and how fast you do it. Many years ago, when Amway was starting off, I attended a seminar given by Rich DeVos. He was a young man at that time and building an MLM business, and he gave quite a good talk. Today he's one of the richest men in the world, and he's retired. He's in his 80s. Anyway, I went to him in the break. He was sitting on the edge of the stage, and I said, Mr. DeVos, what have you found to be the most important quality for success? And he said, without responding, without hesitating, he looked at my name tag. He said, Brian, the most important quality is speed. What we have found in recruiting and training people all over the country is that the people who turn out to be the biggest successes are the ones who take action immediately they hear an idea. If you don't take action immediately, more and more they're finding that there's a window that opens up where you're motivated and informed. And then this window starts to close very quickly. Some people say it closes within 24 hours. Some people say it closes within 24 minutes. But it's a very short window. If you don't dive through the window and take action, it closes, and you can't even remember what the idea was or why you were motivated to act on it. So if you do hear something about taking the first step to upgrade a critical skill that will enable you to leverage yourself and accomplish vastly more, if you do have an idea, move on it fast. Move quickly. Take action immediately. Tonight, the end of the day, go and take action. Many years ago, when I got into sales, and I didn't know this, by the way, I just figured it out in retrospect, I would get up in the morning and read in sales books. And then that day, I would immediately practice what I learned. If I learned a really good way of handling an objection or closing a sale, I would practice it immediately, and I would practice it 5 or 10 times, because it never works the first time. And if I heard something good on an audio program, I would carry a cassette player around with me, and I would take it out of my ear, and I would go in and try it immediately. When I took my first sales seminar, I still remember, It was in Hong Kong. And the speaker was brilliant. His name was Wally Fisher. I still remember because he had started on the streets and was now a multi-millionaire top trainer for a big international company. And he was saying, this is how we sell, this is how we open a conversation, this is how we present, and this is how we close. And I was so excited. It was a full-day seminar. At the breaks, which were 30 minutes long, I would run out of the hotel and I'd run to the office building next door and I'd take an elevator to the top floor and I'd be knocking on doors. And I'd knock on doors for 20 minutes and try what I just learned. And then I'd rush back to the seminar. And I developed a habit of always taking action, like a switchblade knife, always taking action when I heard something good. And I learned later that that is one of the major reasons for success. Because 80% of people never act at all. They hear the same things, but they say, well, I will do something about that later. But right now I have to watch television or go for lunch or coffee or something else. So if you hear something good, remember the one most identifiable quality of successful people is intense action orientation. They hear or see an idea and they move fast on the idea. The mark of failures is they hear the same ideas, but they don't do anything. I've had people come up to me and say, you know, I heard that 2 years ago. That's not new. I said, did you take action on it? Well, no, I didn't take action on it, but I heard it 2 years ago. And what are these people? These people take a bus to the seminar with a ticket paid for by someone else, and they have holes in their shoes. And they take a bus home and watch television, and they blame everybody else's success on luck. So let's look at becoming a great business person. Here's the great discovery. It's called basically the law of belief or the law of correspondence. It says your outer life and business is a reflection of your inner life. That means if you change your inner life, your outer world will change to reflect your inner life. So your life only gets better when you get better. If you want to have better staff, become a better manager. If you want to have better customers, become a better salesperson. If you want to have better children, become a better parent. If you want to have a better marriage, become a better husband or spouse or husband or wife. So your outer world is always a mirror of what's going on the inside. And you cannot control the outer world, but you can control the inner world, which is why every company, every military organization, government, private, so on, focuses on teaching leaders, teaching people business skills. Because as you learn business skills and you think about how to use them, you begin to change and your outer world of results begins to change as well. So let's talk about some of the qualities of top business people. Number one, they have an intense burning desire for success. The work at Harvard on motivation said basically ambition is the most important quality that a person can have to be successful. That means that they are hungry. They have an intense, burning desire. Napoleon Hill, in his book Think and Grow Rich, said the starting point of success is intense, burning desire. You must really want it. Now, the reason why it's so important is because as soon as you set off on a new goal, you will hit walls, obstacles, barriers, disappointments, and failures. And if you don't have enough ambition to drive yourself forward, you'll quit. And that's what most people do. So you always, when we teach this in our more expanded programs on goal setting, we say that there has to be something that you personally really, really want. You want it more than anything else. If you want it intensely enough, you'll achieve it. One of my favorite stories is by Socrates. Socrates was the philosopher for whom Plato was his student, and Aristotle was the student of Plato, and those are considered the three greatest philosophers in history. Well, Socrates never wrote a word. What he did, he was what is known as a peripatetic, which means a walking philosopher. He walked with his students and asked them questions and conversed. He didn't say, do this, do that. He just kept asking people questions, and so they could come to their own conclusions. And he would take a person who had a particular way of thinking and turn them around completely just by asking questions that required that they question themselves. Anyway, so a young man comes to him. He's very famous in ancient Greece, and came and said, I want to be a philosopher. Maybe 20 years old. I want to be a philosopher. I want to be a philosopher more than anything. And he said, well, yes. He said, many people say that. They come to me and say, I want to be a philosopher, but then they drift away and chase girls, get a job, and so on. I said, no, I really want to be a philosopher. He said, well, how do you know you want to be a philosopher? Well, I just know I do. He said, come with me for a second. And he put his arm around his shoulder. And Socrates had been a stonemason, chopping and breaking stones for buildings and for gravestones and so on. So he was very strong. And he put his arm around the young man, and they were walking by the ocean, which is where he normally did his walks. And he turned and he walked into the ocean with the young man. And they walked in up to their knees, a little bit deeper, up to their waist, a little bit deeper, up to the chest. And the young man didn't know what on earth was going on. And at that moment, Socrates grabbed him by the neck and shoved his head under the water. Well, the young man thought that this was an initiation ceremony, and so he just stayed down there with his head. And then for Socrates, like a lock, had his hand on his neck. And so he shook his head to say, I'm ready to come up now. Socrates kept his head down there. And he started to shake more. And he started to shake, and he started to struggle, and he couldn't breathe. And his lungs were burning. And Socrates kept his head. And finally, when he's squirming and throwing his arms around, Socrates pulled him back up. And he's going, and Socrates said, when you want to be a philosopher as much as you wanted to breathe just now, you will become a philosopher. The point is, that's how much you have to want something. It can't be, I sure like to make more money. I sure like to get another car. I sure like to move to a different apartment or get some better clothes. This is not enough. It must be a burning desire for success. And how do we know this? Every single person who is successful in business or any field is a person who has a passion for it. But passion does not mean find your passion. It means they have an intense desire. Number two is they love the products and services that they sell. Is they really believe that their products and services are really good. They interviewed the Inc. 500, the founders of the 500 fastest growing companies in America. They interviewed them about their products and services. Every one of them started their business to produce the product and service for themselves. One of the biggest companies and richest companies in the world is eBay. You've all heard about eBay. It's the biggest auction site in history. Do you know how it was started? It was started by a businessman named Pierre Olmidar, and Pierre had a collection of candy dispensers. They call them Pez, which is a small candy. And they had all different kinds and colors and styles, and he had been collecting them since he was a little boy. And he thought, I wonder if I could sell these. So he set up a little website, and he offered them, and people could bid and say, yes, I want this, so I'll pay more for the 1958 model, and so on. Sort of like stamp collecting. These were candy dispensers that he'd been collecting. And people offered him this, and they offered him that. And he had to set up the software. And it became a game with him to set up the software so he could take bids, collect money, and then ship out the dispensers. And then he thought, well, what else? Do people have other collections or other things they want to sell? So he began to open it up to others who wanted to auction off used products and other things. Today in America, there is a standard expression. Is you have an old cell phone, they say eBay it. In other words, go straight to eBay, put it on, offer it for the highest price. And tens of millions of people are on eBay, maybe hundreds of millions. So you say you wanted to, I just got a copy of this book from Akash. He just gave me this book. I'm going to eBay it. See if I can't sell it before he even gets out of the room. Some people say, well, you signed my book. I'm going to put it on eBay. And it's become the primary auction site, but he started because he wanted it for himself. The company that grew the fastest, 42,000% in 3 years, they started it because they wanted it for their children. The guy who started Chobani Yogurt started it because he loved Greek yogurt, and he wanted to produce yogurt for himself and his family and his friends. So it has to be something that you love for yourself. You cannot sell a product unless you feel emotionally about that product. Number three, they really care about helping their customers. I remember a gentleman came up to me at a seminar and said, I love my company, I love my product, I just don't like the people I have to sell to. And what we found is you can only sell to people with whom you feel sympathy, that you or empathy, that you like, that you care about them. Even if the product is fantastic, if you don't like the people you're selling to, you'll never be successful. So again, successful business people really care about their customers. Number 4 is they're in business for the long term. Another thing that Rich DeVos told me at that same meeting, and many years later I met him, by the way, at a private gathering, because by this time I was moving in higher circles, and he was at a private luncheon, and I went up and told him that how much his advice about action orientation had influenced my life, and that I teach it to everyone. But he also taught me something else. He said, if you go into